Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for House of Quark, which is episode 3 of season 3. I'm getting confused. Episode 3 of season 3 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. In this video, cover the third season episode, House of Quark. So House of Quark is the episode in which a drunken Klingon comes at Quark with a knife, but he slips and falls on his dagger and kills himself. But Quark, in order to boost sales, lies and says that he killed the Klingon in self-defense. However, this doesn't bode well when his family come looking for him. First, a Klingon named Dagor, claiming to be his brother, warns Quark that he better not say he died in an accident because that would bring dishonor on the family. So Quark mentions, no, he definitely died in honorable combat. Then later, another Klingon, this time a woman, comes looking for Quark, and Quark repeats the lie that he killed the Klingon in honorable combat, and this woman, Gilkra, takes out her dagger and charges at Quark, and Quark cowers and hides in the corner, so she immediately knows that he's lying. She then knocks him out, takes him back to the Klingon homeworld, marries him, because apparently the Klingon that came to Quark earlier, Dagor, was someone who the slain Klingon owed a lot of money to and wanted to take over his house, and Grilka, being the widow, doesn't want to do that, and so she, by Quark claiming Kozak died in honorable combat, that makes it easier for Dagor to take over the house. So Grilka comes up with another plan, which is to marry Quark, and then so she can keep her house with Quark as the head. And this, of course, doesn't go well with the other Klingons, and Dagor still wants to find a way to kill Quark and take the house for himself. And so Quark comes up with just some investigation and discovers the fact that Dagor has been financially attacking and sacking their house, which is why their house has grown weaker. And so he takes it to the Klingon court, but the Klingons aren't really interested in hearing about finances and spreadsheets. And then Dagor further brings Rom in as a witness to prove that Quark is lying about killing Kozak, and so doesn't deserve to be the head of the house. And Dagor also challenges Quark to honorable combat because he thinks that Quark is lying and slandering his name. And so Quark and Rom prepare to hightail it out of there, but then they feel guilty about leaving Grilka to her fate. So Quark comes back to meet Dagor in honorable combat, but when the combat's about to start, he just throws his bat'leth on the ground, gets on his knees, and says everyone knows he doesn't have a chance, doesn't stand a chance against Dagor, so this is just an execution, so why don't we drop the pretense and you just execute me? And Dagor's like, whatever you say, Ferengi, and goes to kill him, but Garan steps in the way and says, I didn't want to believe what this Ferengi was saying about you, but the fact that you would kill this pathetic little man proves that he's right. And so they all do the disincommodation thing where they turn around and they throw Dagor out, and Garan tells Grilka that she can have special dispensation to lead her house if that's what she wants. So then Quark promptly asks for a divorce, which she grants him by slapping him and spitting on him, but then she kisses him for real, being very thankful that he saved her house. So I'm back after I had a little break after season 2 of DS9 ended because I also finished my coverage of Next Generation at the same time. So I had a little break doing a lot of celebration videos for Next Generation, did some polls for random episodes, and I did a revisited for The Search, which was the first episode of season 3, but I already covered that episode, so I just did a revisited for it. So I'm finally back with a new video for the public, for everyone to see. So there's a couple. Season 3 is a major change for Deep Space Nine. Not as major as season 3 of TNG was, but still quite major. You have the DP Marvin Rush has gone off to do Voyager, and he was replaced by Jonathan West, who was the DP who replaced Marvin Rush on TNG because in season 6 of TNG, Marvin Rush left to do DS9, and then Jonathan West took over TNG. But now that TNG's over and Voyager's starting, they switch again where Marvin Rush goes to do Voyager and Jonathan West takes over DS9. I suppose they always saw Marvin Rush as their number one, so they put him on the show they wanted to focus on. But but Jonathan West takes over, and the lighting is probably notably darker, I would say. A lot of the actors talk in particular about how Jonathan West sort of preferred the sort of dark cinematographies that use less lights for everything to make it more moody. I think he's a good cinematographer. Marvin Rush was too, to be fair. They're both good. And of course some writers. They're changing the writing staff as well. Influxing some DS9 from TNG writers into DS9. They fired Jim Croker, who I was not very familiar with, but also Peter Allen Fields, who I was familiar with, who I thought was a great writer. I kind of, in retrospect, see it as a mistake. Ira Stephen Bear said that Peter Allen Fields' health was kind of failing, or he was having health problems at the time. And he kind of felt like, yeah, I understand that he has to go to make room for the TNG writers. But Michael Piller also, without Ira Stephen Bear knowing it, fired Robert Hewitt Wolf. And as soon as Ira Stephen Bear heard about it, he's like, "What? Why'd you do that? Like, I worked so well with him. We're in tangent. He's such a good writer. I need him. You can't fire him." And Michael Piller, to his credit, was just like, "Okay, I didn't know you felt that way. If you feel that way, we'll go ahead and keep him." So he was only fired for like 30 minutes, apparently, and the turnaround, so they got to keep Robert Hewitt Wolf. And the new writers that they got from TNG was Ronald D. Moore and Renee Echevarria. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about Renee Echevarria when we get to the next episode, because he wrote the next episode. Ronald D. Moore wrote this episode. So I'll talk about Ronald D. Moore. With him, he at first thought maybe he wanted to go to Voyager. But he had a meeting apparently with Michael Piller. Michael Piller was saying, "I think you shouldn't discount Deep Space Nine. I think Deep Space Nine would be a better fit for you. It fits more your sort of mentality." And I think he's absolutely right. So Ronald D. Moore went back, watched some episodes of Deep Space Nine, thought about it, and apparently he showed up on set when they were filming Generations, and he showed up on set with wearing a Deep Space Nine t-shirt, and had his picture taken with Patrick Stewart while wearing a Deep Space Nine t-shirt, and then the next day just showed up at the writing staff for Deep Space Nine to start work. So he decided that Piller was right, that he should do Deep Space Nine, and I think that was a smart thing for him. And I do recall reading quotes from him that he felt like Next Generation was kind of sort of the university, but Deep Space Nine was more like grad school, that he sort of learned more from being on Deep Space Nine. And then once he graduated from Deep Space Nine and did Battlestar Galactica, he's talked about how he basically took everything he learned from Deep Space Nine, everything he wanted to do on Deep Space Nine, and put that into Battlestar Galactica. So this is definitely part of the reason why Deep Space Nine got much better. It didn't have a huge, it did get a different cinematographer who had a different style, but he was still good. They were both good. So it wasn't like a giant production change like in TNG. TNG had better uniforms, better costumes, better music, better cinematography, better lighting, better script writing, better everything. And even the acting improved. But whereas with Deep Space Nine, most of the production stayed the same. I mean, the cinematography looked different. It was a different style, but it was still, it didn't go from bad quality to good quality. It was just different. But it's the writing was the key thing about Deep Space Nine that changed. That and the introduction of the Defiant. But again, I want to save my talk about the Defiant till the next episode, because the Defiant doesn't feature in this episode at all. And unfortunately, as I said, I already reviewed The Search. So that would be the ideal place to talk about it, but I already reviewed it, so I can't talk about it there. But so I'll save my talk about Renee Echevarria and the Defiant for the next episode. But as far as this episode goes, Ronald D. Moore talked about how he always wanted to write a Klingon comedy episode in Next Generation, but nothing ever came up. So this episode was pitched by a freelancer, and Ira Steven Behr very wisely gave it to Ronald D. Moore immediately, because Ronald D. Moore is known as the Klingon guy. He always writes. And if you notice, I was looking through all the writing credits of the Klingon episodes on DS9, and not all of them, but most of them are written by Ronald D. Moore. So they kept him as the Klingon guy. And so he took this episode and I think did a damn good job. As I said, I think there's a noticeable uptick in the writing, the storytelling in Deep Space Nine. So since I'm on the Quark storyline, let's focus on that first before I get to the B plot with the O'Briens, which I have some major issues with, and I was hinting at, I got some things to say about that. But we'll start with the Quark one. And the thing is that, so I've heard some people love this episode. I've heard people give it a 10 out of 10, put it in their top 10 best episodes of Deep Space Nine, say it's absolutely amazing. Now, I do like this episode, but let's not get crazy here. It's not that great. But it's still, you can tell that uptick in writing, particularly when compared to the second season episode, Profit and Loss, which was a Quark love story. And I railed against that episode. I put that very low in my rankings of season 2 because Quark was 100% out of character. Most of the characters were out of character. The story just seemed like a ripoff of Casablanca, and it just wasn't any good. The romance aspect of it sucked. You don't buy it for Quark that he would suddenly be like, oh, I don't give a shit about my bar, let's store everything away. Whereas this episode, it wasn't necessarily a romance. I mean, kind of sort of was, but it wasn't a flat out, we didn't have Quark being, I love you, come run away with me bullshit. He was more in character, and this is how he should have been portrayed in Profit and Loss, as someone who is kind of reluctant and kind of I like it, trying to, I don't care about that stupid Klingon female, I'll just let her do whatever the fuck, but in the end, he shows he has a heart of gold, and he sticks up for her and wins her house back. And this is a heroic story arc for Quark that you can buy, because the story arc in Profit and Loss, you totally didn't buy. It felt 100% out of nowhere, out of character, and so that's why a lot of people are having a hard time buying Quark as a hero. But in an episode like this, where it seems more natural, more in character for Quark, that you do buy that ultimately he does have a heart of gold, and ultimately he will do the right thing and be the hero, you totally buy it 100%. And so it's just a far superior episode in every way. And as a comedy, it does really work. Now, it's not a flat-out slapstick comedy, which is probably why it's good. The Ferengi episodes where they try to be a straight-up comedy and throw in all these stupid jokes, oh, look at how greedy they are terrible. Usually terrible because they try to knock you over the head with the fact it's a comedy, whereas this episode the comedy feels more natural to the story. It's like a byproduct of the plot. Like it's a well-written story, it's a well-written plot that happens to have some comedic moments that really, really work. Like when Grilka shows up with the dagger, it's like, defend yourself, and Quark goes, hides and he just gets thrown over the counter, his Latin flies everywhere, and he puts his tray over him. It's just funny. And then other moments with the Klingons, like when Quark first shows up at the Great Hall and he comes in and does like this weird curtsy. He looks so out of place, and they do such a good job of doing the fish out of water and the whole thing with Galron. It's like, the House of Kozak is gone. It will now be known as the House of... He looks at Quark. He's like, Quark. 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 The House of Quark. Like, that's a funny moment. And that moment always reminds me of my ex-wife, because she always used to call Quark Quirk, and that's what Garan just did. But anyway, and the other really hilarious moment is when Quark's trying to step them through the, how Dagor was financially attacking the House of Kozak and trying to steal it financially. And look with all the Klingons looking at these pads, and Quark's like, if you look at subsection J of Article of Graph 12 or whatever, you see like Garan looking at it like cross-eyed. He's like, enough, and just throws it away. That's a really funny moment, but I do have some logistical problems with this, because, and this gets to the whole thing with the race of hats. They portray Klingons as a warrior culture. Fine. Like, if the warrior class is what defines their culture, I get it. But in order to be a functioning society, a functioning empire, they're shown to be an empire, they have to have departments and other aspects of society outside of just being a warrior. And as it pertains to this episode, like, for example, they have scientists. They need to have doctors. They need to have scientists. And as it pertains to this episode, they should have a financial division that handles stuff like this. They should have their version of, I don't even know what the organization is called, but something that that protects people from scams or whatever, and that the Grilka could have submitted went to them. And there should be Klingon accountants. In order for it to be a functional society, they need to have this. And the fact they took it to the leader of the whole entire empire to deal with this financial situation just felt silly to me. It felt like they just wanted to put Robert O'Reilly in there, which is kind of funny, because there were a ton of episodes where I thought Garan should have appeared and he didn't, so maybe Robert O'Reilly just wasn't available those days. But this one, it feels like he's kind of being shoehorned into the script because they want to be like, oh look, it's Garan. Now, to be fair, I think Ronald D. Moore had a quote saying that he was familiar with Garan as writing for him on DS9, or sorry, TNG, and so that he thought, hey, Bob would love to do this show, so let's go ahead and just write him in the script. But yeah, no, it makes no sense. for them to show up at to the High Council of the entire Klingon Empire, the leader of the entire empire, to deal with this minor financial situation. They should have a subdivision of Klingons. Now, this reminds me of apparently Ronald D. Moore back in season 3 of TNG wrote a sort of Bible of the Klingon Empire. Now, not all of it was actually used. Some of it was disregarded. But one of the things he wrote is that the Klingons sort of had conquered other species and other races in the past, and that these races have been folded into the Klingon Empire. Like, they don't just subjugate them, they actually fold them into the Empire, and that these other races handle some of these other aspects of societies that Klingons don't want to feel like handling because they're more worried about being warriors, such as, the law, the scientists, doctors, financial stuff. And that would make sense if we ever saw that on screen, but we never did. That aspect of Ronald D. Moore's Bible was never incorporated into the actual show. So, I mean, that would have made sense if they had this other alien race that was responsible for taking care of all the financial side of the Klingon Empire, but they never said that, and so there should be Klingons. There should be a bureau, an agency that they can go to review and to flat out say, oh yes, he's committing fraud, he's financially attacking this other house, and that's not called for. And then maybe take it to Gowron or the High Council or whatever, and then instead of Quark sitting there doing subsection J, the financial bureau would just file their things to the High Council and be like, he is being dishonorable, and then Gowron would be like, you're being dishonorable, get the fuck out of here, you lose your house. But that of course wouldn't make a very interesting episode. Now, you wouldn't have this funny moment with Gowron looking cross-eyed at this thing, or the big fight at the end where Quark can throw his bat left, because the system as portrayed in the episode, that all the guy has to do is say, oh, he's lying, when Quark presents evidence that proves that he is financially attacking Grokla's house, that all he has to say is, oh, he's lying, and they just throw the evidence away. It's like, okay, you guys fight, and that will figure it out. That's like, I know the Klingons supposed to be a warrior race, but still, their society would have fallen apart if that's how they run it. So, it is done for plot convenience, to be fair, but this is just a minor, quibble that I have with this episode. It's still... it's a funny scene, and it's a good speech of Quark being the hero at the end. So ultimately, I still do really like the episode, but I admit there's some contrived sort of finagling that portrays the Klingon Empire as impractical in order to tell this funny story or funny plot. The other aspect of this episode I always found really interesting was the whole Klingon Ferengi is a very interesting combination to have Quark marry this Klingon woman, because Klingons and Ferengis always have this feud. Like they kind of hate each other, or not so much hate each other, but look at each other as beneath the other. And it's funny because it started with, you hear it in a lot of episodes throughout TNG, where the Klingons would be like, I was thinking of the episode of Redemption where these Klingons are starting to brawl in the bar, and no, not in the bar, it was like a challenge. Someone challenged Gowron to his leadership, and Worf is like, we're in the middle of the war, hello, let's not do this bullshit right now. And one of the things he said is, are we gonna fight amongst ourselves like a pack of Ferengi? I always remember that. And there are other moments throughout TNG where Klingons were use Ferengi as a derogatory term. Oh, you're just like a sniveling Ferengi. And it's funny because then Deep Space Nine came along and they started showing the Ferengi doing the same thing but Klingons, whereas they had an episode in the Nagus where the Nagus was, had this argument with his son was being dim-witted or something. He's like, it's like talking talking to a Klingon. So it shows that the Ferengi think of the Klingons think of the Ferengi as a bunch of cowering, sniveling, cowards and who are just petty. And the Ferengi think of the Klingons as a bunch of idiotic brutes who are just, stupid and brutish. And so the two of them, never, really get along. But Quark is a little bit more amendable because, as I said, he lived most of his life amongst other species and dealt with other species, and personally, being a bartender, having to get to know them, so he's more sort of open-minded than I would say most Ferengi are. And so then you have that one scene where he's with Grilka and he explains what the Gore is doing to her house and attacking it financially, and she was like, oh, so are you saying that he's financially attacking her finances like a sniveling and then stops herself because she was going to say a Ferengi. She was going to be like but Quark finishes for her. It's like a Ferengi. So I like that. That was a nice little touch there, because basically Grilka, her natural inclination, just the way she would speak normally and the way most Klingons would speak, would be to throw out Ferengi like an insult, like a Ferengi, but she stopped herself because she realized she was talking to a Ferengi and she didn't want to be rude. But it's interesting though that Quark finished for her, because he's sort of saying, taking what would be intended as an insult, but throwing it back like a point of pride. Like she was saying, oh, this unhonorable coward is just messing with our finances like a sniveling Ferengi. But Quark sees it as, actually, he's very expertly, smartly weakened your house like a ingenious and smart and financially savvy Ferengi. So I love that. That is a really nice touch. And then, of course, the moments where she does the divorce and knocks him out is funny. And when they get married, she kisses him, but then sort of, hacks and spits after doing it like it's gross. Really nice moments. So, yeah, it's a really good character story for Quark. And this is when they're starting to sort of transition Rom into being a better character and not such as idiotic, sniveling, conniving, idiot. They're starting. He still comes off a bit idiotic in this episode, but they are beginning the process of. He doesn't come off as conniving or sniveling. Like the moment they have at the end where he's tells Quark, oh, tell me the story. He's like, I already told you. He's like, no, tell it to me. Yeah, so that they're, again, better writing in season 3, and they're starting to build his character more. So now let me get to the B plot with Miles and Keiko O'Brien, and I mentioned that I have a problem with this, so let me just not preamble and get straight to the issue I have. So Keiko's sad because the school's closed down and she's being depressed, and Miles tries to cheer her up by having dinners and going out and doing great things, and it does cheer her up, but only temporarily because she has nothing to do. She's wasting away. So Miles comes up with an idea to build an arboretum on Deep Space Nine. Asks Cisco. Cisco gives his permission, and then he's looking over the plans and he shows it to Bashir and says, "What do you think?" He's like, "Oh yeah, this looks good. It ought to keep her happy for 2 months, and then she's going to go right back to being depressed again because you're treating it like a hobby, but that's her profession, and if she's a botanist, she needs to be a botanist." And so O'Brien goes and finds her a job in an expedition to Bajor and says, "I don't mind if we're apart because I need to worry about you. You need to be who you are, and you're a botanist, and go be a botanist." Here's my issue with that storyline. why I don't follow Bashir's logic about this being a hobby of the Arboretum on Deep Space Nine. That is essentially the exact same thing that she did on the Enterprise. When they first met, before she even met Miles, she was a botanist on board an artificial environment of a spaceship floating around in the dead vacuum of space, but would travel to different worlds and collect alien samples, but mainly would just like have this place, this arboretum in this middle of, inside this artificial environment to make it feel more green and less sterile and more, Earth-like and more like a Class M planet, I guess you could say, for other species, other races. And she would gather different samples from alien worlds and examine them and be a botanist. So if they had an arboretum on Deep Space Nine, she would be doing the exact same goddamn thing. But in this case, instead of traveling to alien worlds and collecting samples, other people would travel from alien worlds and deliver samples for her. And that's no different. That makes no difference. She would be doing the exact same goddamn thing. So, in other words, the idea that Miles comes up with to have an arboretum on Deep Space Nine is actually a brilliant idea, and Bashir is wrong for saying you're treating it like a hobby, because she's treating it like the same goddamn profession that she had already had. And on top of that, it makes sense to have an arboretum on Deep Space Nine. In fact, the scene where O'Brien goes to Cisco and asks for permission, Cisco's like, "Oh yes, if it will make Keiko happy, absolutely, I'm all for it." But it shouldn't be just about making Keiko happy. It would make sense for the station, because again, this is a sterile environment floating in space, and a lot of people live there. I know that there's a lot of people who are traveling to and from, but there's a sizable population of people that live there, and they should have a green sort of place, not just the hollow suites, because that's artificial, those are just holograms, but a real tangible place like an arboretum with plant life and vegetables and grass and all this stuff that they had on the Enterprise. It makes so much sense, and it could even be beneficial for visitors who are visiting the station constantly, who miss being on the planet. They could go to the Arboretum, and it would be a beautiful place, and it would make so much sense to have this on the station. and Keiko could be every bit of a botanist by being in charge of that and examining all these exotic plants coming through the Gamma Quadrant. I talked about this back in I think it was A Man Alone, when Keiko first decided to do the school, because Miles was saying, "Oh yeah, there's tons of plant life coming through the Gamma Quadrant, and you could examine it." And Keiko's very dismissive of that. It's like, but it's not the same thing. Why not? It is, in fact, the exact same thing as what she did on the Enterprise. And again, that they did it for plot convenience, because they wanted her to make her a teacher. This time they did it for plot convenience because they want to get rid of her. They just want an excuse. And this has been confirmed from interviews from the writers, is that they had decided to get Keiko off the station so that they could have Miles spending more time with Bashir and develop that friendship more. I don't follow the logic, and I've heard a lot of people make the same criticism, which I think there's a reason why. It's a valid criticism. Don't follow the logic that you need to get rid of Keiko in order to develop O'Brien and Bashir's friendship more. Like, you can do that perfectly fine with Keiko still being there. Like, it's just an excuse to get rid of her, and it absolutely comes off that way. I mean, this whole plot line has this deception of appearing like it's a lovely character story for O'Brien. And I do say I do like a lot of their Miles and Keiko's interaction. I think this is one of the best episodes that deal with their relationship, and the moments where he's like, oh, don't you know what day it is? Is I'm married to the best woman in the world day or something, and just making that up, and but how she's still sad, and O'Brien's sad that she's sad. Like, it's a good storyline until they get to the whole scene with Bashir saying, oh, that's just gonna make her happy for 2 months because it's just a hobby. It fucking isn't. It's the exact same profession that she was doing before she met Miles. So it's doing exactly what she should be doing. And in the universe, I would say that O'Brien shouldn't listen to Bashir. Bashir doesn't really know anything about relationships. He's young, hasn't had that many committed relationships. It's talking about he couldn't imagine himself being married. So why the fuck are you listening to him? He's clearly giving you bad advice and doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. So you should have just ignored him and built a goddamn arboretum who would have benefited the station. And it would have been... In fact, he never even floated the idea to Keiko about the Arboretum. He never said, oh, what do you think about this idea of the Arboretum? And maybe you should have fucking asked her. Maybe she would have preferred to do that rather than go on this exposition on Bajor, in which she would have to take Molly and live in these sort of harsh conditions and be away from her husband. Maybe she would have much preferred to stay and be a botanist on the fucking station the exact same way that she was a botanist on the Enterprise. He didn't even give her that option. He didn't, give her the information. I already got permission from Siska to do this. It was just because the episode was trying to tell you that Bashir was right. But he's actually not. And it was just a contrived excuse because they wanted to get rid of Keiko, and that's all it is. And I think it's even worse than what they did in A Man Alone. And I even mentioned that in my review for A Man Alone. It's like, this is bad, but wait till we get to season 3 because it's even worse what they do there, and that's here. And it's absolutely makes no sense. Like having an arboretum, they even said you can have an I'm sorry, it drives me bonkers. But anyway, I would now like to thank all my Patreon supporters very much for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I'm very thankful for everyone's support. I'd like to give a big special thanks to Jordan Johnson, Brendan Neilhouse, and Antarius. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Tyler Cease. Where am I? Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miguelesio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, House of Quark, more like Spouse of Quark. Today's comment is going to be in the form of a song sung to the tune of the Star Trek Voyager theme. Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Voyager, a Voyager, Voyager. But will Quark and Grilka remain married? Will Odo ever be in Starfleet? And who is Eric Cartman's father? Tune in next week to find out. Yeah, that's Star Trek Voyager. You probably heard me say it before, but that's how I'd always used to sing that over the theme song every time I was watching it. But anywho. Spouse of Quark isn't even a wordplay. That's also true. It is the Spouse of Quark. So I don't know. That's one of your weaker ones in my humble opinion. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, I actually like this episode quite a bit. The idea of inserting Quark into Klingon culture in this story works well, and I really like this version of Gowron, which apparently by a year from now, he would be rewritten to have a few IQ points lower, where here we actually got him to see the type of leader that I guess Martok, his successor, would continue. After all, unless Gowron had an issue with Dagor that he wanted to bring him down, doesn't seem consistent with how he would especially be written later. Aside from this gripe, I actually enjoyed it. I liked Grilka, and I even sensed some chemistry between Quark and Grilka, which unfortunately 2 years later I didn't see the exact same as I saw here. I'll give this 8 weapons to throw on the ground out of 10. No, yeah, I agree. Totally agree with the 2 years later and the chemistry not being there anymore. Totally agree with that. And yes, Gowron will lose a couple IQ points in season 4. But anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, I like this episode. The Quark plot had a lot of funny moments, which were well balanced by the more serious O'Brien plot. I noticed that Rom is always wearing the typical Ferengi piece of clothing covering the back of his head, which Quark never wears. I wonder if this was an executive decision. If it was, why was it decided that way? I'm not sure. Is it out of character for Quark to not to run away, but to return to the High Council's chamber? I heard complaints that it's unrealistic that Gowron himself is dealing with this matter, but in my opinion, in a aristocratic society like the Klingon, such question of inheritance are very important because they can easily lead to internal fighting. Sisko showed great leadership qualities in this episode, but why does Kira refuse to leave the room until ordered to do so? Next week on DS9, finally racial cliches are forgotten when a Klingon merchant ship is plundered by Ferengi warriors. My rating is an 8 out of 10. Yeah, that sounds like an interesting pitch to me. The reverse, the Klingon merchant ship being attacked by Ferengi warriors. Because we know we've seen some militant Ferengi before in TNG, so they can be fierce. They have those whips. But anyway, and in Enterprise, they invaded a whole ship, and don't get me started on that fucking episode. But anyway, so I see what you're saying about Gowron taking time out to deal with this important matter because it deals with different houses and nobles and whatnot. But would he be sitting there dealing with the financial, looking at a pad, being like, and say, oh, just fight it out? No. There should be a financial bureau. I don't care if it's a warrior culture. They need to cover all aspects of society. Otherwise, this whole empire can't function. They need a financial bureau. But anyway, sorry, that's just my point. Next comment is from Alex, who says, a pretty good Quark episode. There was more chemistry between Quark and Grilka in their fake marriage than between Quark and his supposed true love, Natima, in Profit and Loss. This is the episode where Dagor has Klingon upper teeth, super white human lower teeth. I can't unsee it with Worf and DS9 too. Must be a reason why the makeup department didn't do a lower Klingon teeth. 8.5 out of 10. You know, that thing with the teeth has been pointed out to me as well. And I gotta be honest, I never noticed stuff like that. I never pay attention to fine details. I just never notice. I just my personality, I guess, I never pick up, nor particularly care about little details like that. But yes, you made a really good point, the same one I've been making this video, about how this is much more believable of a relationship between these two than the whole profit and loss thing, which is just you don't buy at all. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, Quark teams up with Buffy Buffy Summers on a new TV show to fight against the Klingons and vampires. I love this episode. Quark shows his accountant skills. Kira forgets Dax isn't human. Miles O'Brien has invented a new Irish tradition. Is this the beginning of the best friendship on Trek? First scene between Miles and Julian, I think. Gowron was in 3 scenes, and the middle one was out of place. Quark and Grilka should have gone to the revenue first, as the High Council shouldn't deal with this aspect of the story. Thank you! Anyway, sorry. Best line in the episode, Quark. I am son of Keldar, and I have come to answer the challenge of Dagor, son of whatever. So my rating is 9.5. Why does Rom need Quark to tell the story again when he was there to witness it himself? I love the faces of Odo and Bashir when Quark tells everyone he killed that drunk Klingon out of 10. Yeah, they were. The faces of Bashir and Odo, I was looking at them when Quark was telling the story. They were like, they had this look like, oh, come on. This is the bullshit. This is ridiculous. Which it was nice. It was a really nice touch. I agree. And yes, that line was really awesome when Quark says that. And son of whatever. And I like earlier in the episode when the Gore threatens him, but it says, oh, make sure it's not a accidental death. Tell people that, you killed them in combat. And after that, Dagor says, Kapla! And Quark goes, Kapla! Kind of like blahs at him, which is kind of funny. But then later when Grilka says Kapla to him, he says, Kapla to you too. I love that. So a lot of nice little subtle touches. And I forgot to address this scene. Someone else already brought it up where Kira refused to leave the room. I actually do like that. I think that I do buy it that Bajorans would have different culture than humans. And she's like, well, why do I need to leave? That must be a human thing. And I don't think she's implying Dax is human because it's between Sisko and Miles. Dax just understands it because she spent a lot of time with humans. Clearly much more time than Kira has spent. I love that they're reminding us that they come from different cultures. So I actually thought that was a nice touch. Just me. And let's see. Is this the beginning of the best friendship of Trek? First scene between Miles and Julian? No, they had plenty of episodes together. They had a whole episode in season 2 Armageddon game where they were bonding. So I don't know where you get that from. But anyway, maybe you were joking? Maybe? I don't know. Sometimes I don't get sarcasm. Anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, I like this episode more each time I watch it, which is due to the acting of Armin Shimmerman and Mary Kay Adams, who have such sublime chemistry. Sadly, this is the last time we visit Kronos until Enterprise. The Miles and Keiko story drags the episode down. Whenever I see the two of them getting romantic, it makes me feel profoundly uncomfortable, partly because they have no chemistry, but mainly because their dialogue is written for teenagers acting. 7 Klingon divorces out of 10. I disagree with Miles and Keiko. I think they do have chemistry. And that's not what bothered me about the storyline. What bothered me about the storyline is that there's nothing wrong with her having an arboretum on DS9. That it's not a hobby, it's a career. The same fucking career she had. Sorry, get started on that. But I had no issue with their chemistry or the dialogue. I bought it as someone who was married once himself. It seems the way they're portrayed as a married couple does ring very true to me. But anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for the House of Quark, House of Quark, out of 10 is an 8. extremely good. I do think it is a really good episode. I think the chemistry between Quark and Gilker work. I think a lot of the comedy works. I think it's an interesting plot. The comedy feels natural coming out of the good plot. There are some nitpicks I have with the episode, such as there should be a bureau of finance that deals with accounting situations. There's in no situation should Gowron be sitting there cross-eyed looking at a pad being like, enough, and throwing it on the ground. It's funny, but it actually doesn't make sense for a functional society. But of course my bigger issue is with the O'Brien plot, because as I've mentioned several times already, the Arboretum is a fucking career, and it would make sense for Deep Space Nine. They should have went with the Arboretum, but this is one of those cases where you definitely feel that invisible hand of the writers just saying, oh, let's just get Keiko away so we can develop O'Brien and Bashir more. Which again, that whole concept is faulty, because why? You don't need to get rid of Keiko in order to develop Bashir and O'Brien. Like, I don't get, like, this whole thing. That's why this storyline drives me insane, because it's just an excuse to do something that actually doesn't need to be done. And it's just contrived and drives me bonkers. So I wouldn't give this episode a 9 or 10. I think that people who do are being a bit overzealous. I mean, it's good, but it's not that good. But yeah, 8 out of 10 I think works for this episode. So that is it for my review of The House of Quark. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe, comment, perhaps. Helps out the channel a lot. And if you would really want to help out the channel, there is the option, no pressure, it's just if you want, to support me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below. Also, if you want to listen to this in podcast form or Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts, there's also a link to Podbean, which is my podcast home, but you can go from there to wherever you want. Listen to all my Star Trek reviews in podcast form. So you wouldn't be able to see this funky thing I'm doing with my hands. But anyway, so let's see what's coming up next on my channel. Where are we here? So Saturday will be my review for Equilibrium. Monday, I'll be back over on Patreon for another revisited, this time revisiting my review for Second Skin. And Wednesday, I'm back on the main channel for another new review for The Abandoned. And then on Thursday, back over the Patreon again, getting whiplash, back over the Patreon again for another revisited, this time revisiting my review for Civil Defense. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Voyager to come in a month or two. Maybe just a month, actually. But yeah. And many other Star Trek videos and other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.